Hi everyone, it's Monica, and welcome back to Tailor-Made Cards for You. Well, today instead of putting together a card, I thought I would show you what I do with a lot of my scrap pieces of paper. I typically will save all of them because they're so beautiful and I just hate to throw any paper away. I'm sharing with you a couple of cards I made with my process. Now typically what I'll do is after I cut my paper, I have a drawer that I stick all of my scraps in. And then when I get enough, I'll sit down and I'll make several backings with my scrap piece of paper. So what I thought I would do today is share with you how I do this and some little techniques that I use for creating my backgrounds. I'm not going to necessarily put a card together today. I just want to show you what my process is for using some of these scraps. So let's go ahead and pull out some of these scraps and get started. Now here's an example of one of my finished backings. As you can see, it kind of looks like a quilt. It has different pieces of paper all together, and typically what I'll do is once I have it all together, I'll add some faux stitching. Now you can easily use a sewing machine if you have one, but a lot of times I'm lazy and I don't want to pull out my sewing machine. So this Bow Bunny stamp set has several different types of stitching that works great for this technique. So first what you want to do is you want to just gather all of your scraps. Now I like to keep my scraps based in themes. You could easily keep your reds together or your greens together, but I like to keep it theme based because I don't necessarily follow a color pattern. I follow a theme pattern. I also like to have my paper cutter handy. Now I know we are working with scraps, but sometimes you just need smaller scraps than you might have in your stash. This Tim Holtz guillotine cutter is great because it's small enough to fit right on my desktop, and I can just put it aside when I'm working on this technique. Now typically when I am putting together my card, I like to have a couple of focal points, and those are my bigger pieces. And I'll start with that one typically first, and then I'll work around it. Now for this, the effect that you're going for is like a quilt, but a quilt that doesn't necessarily have a pattern. You don't want your paper to be exactly going up to the edge of each paper. You want it to overlap. You also want to have long ones as well as square ones, rectangular ones. The only thing I would stay away from are probably your circles. But anything that has your right angles are going to work great. Now I went ahead and sped up the video because typically what you're doing here is just cutting paper and gluing it down. It doesn't take a lot of time, and there is no rhyme or reason. You don't have to have a pattern. You don't have to have a set theme necessarily in mind. You just want to make sure that your colors are kind of hodgepodge. I wouldn't want to put my reds next to my reds or my greens next to my greens. I want it to look eclectic. So I do have a little bit of thought when I'm placing my paper, but not too much. I also like to have a focal point on the bottom as well. As you saw, I put the little bingo card at the top, and then I had a focal point at the bottom as well using that little ledger. And I like to keep some of my paper a little bit light because after I stamp it, I may want to put a sentiment, and I want to make sure that there is light enough paper where my sentiment will show through. Now I'll sit down at any given time and put together about 5 or 6 of these backings because they are great to have on hand, especially when you don't have a lot of time to put a card together. Now I know you could easily pull out some beautiful cardstock, but this pattern and this technique is so fun, and it works for almost any design. So once you have your pattern in place, you're going to want to go ahead and pull out your faux stitching. And you can easily use a block, or acrylic block, or you can use your MISTI or any stamping platform that you have. But to me, it takes too much time to have to reposition it every single time. So I like to just do it with my fingers. Your stitching may not be perfect, but keep in mind, again, this is a backing. So you're going to be adding things on top of it. So the stitching isn't going to be your focal point. And it's okay if it's a little bit off. I love imperfection, and that's part of my vintage style, is to have imperfection. So I don't mind if my stitches are a little bit wonky. So once you have all your stitching done, it's time to add some layers. Now I'm not talking about paper layers, I'm talking about stamping layers. This is where you can really have some fun with your stamps. There isn't any rhyme or reason to this. You're just creating a background. So you can pull out any of your stamps to create the background. I probably would work with more of background stamps, not necessarily full-on images, because a lot of these images that you stamp, or a lot of these stamps that go on your paper, are going to be covered when you actually go to decorate your card. So this is supposed to be just a background effect. Numbers work great. Little sentiments are fine as well. Anything just to add to the backing. You could even add pieces of ephemera if you wanted. You don't want your ephemera to be too big. Again, you don't want it to overpower your background. You just want it to add to it to give a more eclectic look. Now, I also wanted to give you another technique that will work for this kind of a background. I know not everybody will have that Bow Bunny stitch die set, or you may not have a sewing machine. So you can still create a great vintage card and a great eclectic background using some of your distress crayons. Now, the colors that I find work best are your brown tones. So a vintage photo or a walnut stain is probably the choice that I would have. You might also want to use your gathered twigs, but I have always gone towards the darker tones. The one that I'm using today is my vintage photo, and what I'm doing is just outlining the edges of the pieces of paper. Now, once you have all of your outlines in place, you're going to want to take something that's moist to rub in the crayon to have a smeared effect. This is what's going to make your paper look more vintage. Now, the medium that I typically use is my multi-matte medium, and I just find that that works really well, especially when I'm layering paper, because not only will it work great as a way to smudge my crayons, but it also works as additional adhesive. Washi tape is another item that you can add to give a little bit more color, and I also find that it helps to secure your paper as well. Alright, so now that you have your background put together, it's time to add some of those little elements. Now, on the previous cardstock that we created, we used some stamps to create some more of the background, but I wanted to give you another idea for adding some elements to your background. Remnant rubs make great additions. Not only can you find little phrases, but there's some great number ones as well, and those make great backgrounds. You could easily add some metal elements as well, but I would wait till I'm actually putting together my card before I add a metal element, because that's something I wouldn't want to cover up. Alright, so I hope that you've enjoyed this quick technique and it gives you some ideas on using some of your scraps this holiday season. So if you've enjoyed the video and this quick technique, I would sure appreciate a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, don't forget to hit that subscribe button before you head out. As always, I'll leave a list of all the products that I've used to create these backgrounds, as well as some of the links to the stores. Additionally, if you'd like to leave a comment, I would sure love hearing your feedback. I try to answer as many comments as I can, and you guys always give me ideas for future videos. Alright everyone, thanks so much for stopping by, and I hope you all have a great weekend. We'll see you soon.